Ever thought about. Every law enforcement organization has two different types of cultures. You have the culture of leadership and you have the culture of non-leaders. They're created exactly the same ways. This has everything to do with FTOs and their power and influence. In both versions, the culture of leadership and the culture of non-leadership is created by role modeling. With the culture of leadership, everybody looks to things that aren't written down. They're not anybody's policy manual. They're not in an SOP, and it's not in the general orders. Everybody looks to the role modeling of the very top administrators to see the way the organization really works, to see who's promoted, to see if there's any favorites, to see if there's favoritism, to see how discipline really works, to see about the role modeling of the top administrators. And all the formal leaders take shape behind that. Even though it's not written down, no one's ever an exception. The other gigantic culture, the culture of non-supervisors, non-formal leaders, they're created the same way the culture of leadership is created, through role modeling. And who has the power of influence? The line supervisors, field training officers, and first-line supervisors. Perhaps you've never thought about your power and influence. Anyone who's been appointed a field training officer has incredible power, has an incredible influence. And along with that comes a lot of responsibility, because just like the administrators shaping and molding the culture of leadership agency-wide, you do the same thing. And the numbers of people are far greater who are non-formal leaders. And as a result, your responsibilities are far greater than your counterparts who aren't field training officers. Have you ever checked your own attitude and your morale? And how do you come across to those that you lead? Field training officers are the first supervisors for brand new officers. And that's a period when they're most susceptible to peer pressure. You know that phrase, lead by fear? Sometimes people do that and they don't know that they're doing that. Or they can be bitter and they can be hateful, and they say things, or their body language mocks and puts down the leadership of the organization. Thus, because of the power of role modeling, even though they may never directly cut down an organization's leadership, what they're doing, the power and influence that they have by their body language and their tone of voice and the indirect, the subtle put downs, the end result is people get done with the field training program, and sometimes if they've had FTOs who are like that, who are cynics, then they are cynics too, right in the first year of their career. They actually believe that the leadership of the organization is their adversary. What a shame that is. Being a field training officer, in my view, is one of the most important levels of leadership. And any field training officer in America that doesn't understand that they are a powerful, influential leader is just not been educated in their role and in their ability to shape the entire culture for the biggest group of officers, of agents in the organization. But then it goes beyond that. The greatest single flaw of field training officers and line supervisors, for that matter, nationwide, is that some want to be liked more than they want to be a leader. And the consequence for integrity with that flaw is devastating and far-reaching, and goes on years and years into the future of people as they follow throughout their career. Because if you want to be liked more than you want to be a leader, you know what happens? Small infractions are winked at. They're ignored. Field training officers pretend like they didn't see what just happened. And so do line supervisors at different levels and in different ways outside of a patrol division or wherever the field training program is led and managed. Because some people want to be liked more than they want to be a leader, other consequences happen. The kinds of consequences where they see that people are being cynical and they're putting down the organization. They're a former leader, but instead of confronting those who are putting down the organization, degrading it, humiliating it, not only sometimes do they look the other way and not do anything about that, they join in. And because they have so much power and influence, the consequence of them putting down, demeaning, and ridiculing a specific leader or the entire organization is far-reaching and much more devastating than simply an officer in some other way. And because of wanting to be liked more than they want to be a leader, something else happens. Many people refer to it as the central tendency theory. What this means is, when it's time to do the daily observation report for the new person, the central tendency theory says this: regardless of the scale that you use or the specific type of form that you use, if it's numerical, The central tendency theory says that as opposed to a new person deserving the lower numbers, the ones or the twos as an example, the central tendency theory says that the FTO will give the central numbers, even if they deserve the low numbers. And the reason for this isn't complicated. If you've got a good field training program, the recruit is going to have the ability to evaluate the field training officer. And the field training officer knows that, and they know that it's coming. Well, if you do it the right way, even if other field training officers have bought into the central tendency theory and giving the person consistently the middle numbers simply because they don't want to cause themselves extra work by documenting why exceptionally low or exceptionally high numbers were given. They don't want to have to turn the page over and then justify those high or low numbers. More reasons to buy into the central tendency theory. What a field training officer does then, he submits the only written documentation about that employee as acceptable, because by definition, regardless of the specific definitions of those numerical numbers, almost all the definitions of those middle numbers say you're acceptable. So look at the long-term consequence of this. If you're hiring and the field training program is part of the hiring process, it's the final part. It's the final end of the hiring process. It's the last opportunity for the organization to wash out people that shouldn't have gotten that far to begin with. It's the last opportunity to prevent someone from being a 20-year problem to the organization, to get rid of someone, to terminate someone. And the central tendency theory means that the field training officers have evaluated that person with numbers that by definition mean that that person is acceptable. So all the written documentation says, by definition, that person is acceptable. You've messed over your organization, and it's a 25-year problem now for the organization. But then there are more reasons, more connections to integrity. I've already touched about the power of your role modeling. But how about this? Have you ever considered, as a group, the field training officers in your organization actually setting performance standards for themselves? Performance standards. You know, if you're like most field training programs, you have people who have no business being FTOs. Either they were intimidated into applying for the program, they were simply appointed. Years ago, when the selection process wasn't very good, they made it through. They're in for just the benefits or the compensation of the FTO program. Their heart's not in it anymore. Maybe they used to be dedicated and sincere, but now they're not. They're sometimes referred to as dead wood. Or you have that classic problem I've already talked about, cynics as FTOs. If you could look at the dozen best field training programs in the nation, there are some things they do that most don't do. And one of the common things that these exceptional field training programs do is that the field training officers themselves set standards for themselves, performance standards, and they're in writing. They're standardized, they applied the same, and because the field training officers are creating them, people don't look upon this as though they're dumped on or this is something that someone just put on us. We're the ones creating it because we want to be respected. Of those few FTO programs that actually have done that well and they have set standards for themselves, here are the most common standards. One is regular FTO meetings. If you don't have regular FTO meetings, you're going to be dysfunctional as a group of field training officers to begin with. And I'm defining regular as at least monthly. Some really good FTO programs have meetings every other week, but at least monthly. So one performance standard would be, as an example, in a calendar year, have 3 unexcused absences from the FTO meetings. Not that you weren't in court or you had the flu or something, you just didn't want to get up and go in to the meeting. Do that 3 times, and a typical performance standard would say that on the 3rd time you do that, having unexcused absence, you're terminated from the FTO program. Another one would be that a pattern of negative evaluations from recruits has now existed, and the typical wording for that would be 3 recruits in sequence numerically have evaluated you at a certain number or below. That happens 3 times in a row, you're terminated. And the last performance standard, some FTO programs are so good that at the end of the year, typically in December, they have a retraining session for themselves. They go to the academy, wherever they're pulling from, and they learn what new techniques, what new strategies, what new information recruits are now learning compared with just a year ago. And they have a 1.5 or 2 day class on that, in addition to what new general orders, new standard operating procedures, what new rules and regulations have been implemented inside the organization. And if you think about it, we should have been doing that all to begin with, because if we aren't implementing things that make us stay up to date on new strategies, techniques, information, general orders, rules, and regulations, then how can we do a good job of training new personnel? And in fact, in some cases, the new personnel knows more than the FTO does about certain topics, because the FTO could have been an FTO for 5 years, and his or her knowledge is 5 years now dated. So it's a really good thing for any FTO program to do. Most refer to it as recertifying themselves. And the recertification aspect of this comes by this. At the end of the day-long class, or perhaps it's 2 days worth of information, it varies depending upon how much information there is to teach, there's a test. It's a fair multiple choice test. Everybody takes the same test. There's a passing grade. Fail that test, and you're terminated as being an FTO. Those are the 3 most common performance standards. Now, obviously, your group of FTOs can modify that, revise that. I'm simply going over what I've found in traveling the country, continually working with field training programs. It's a healthy thing to do. In addition to being good for you as a field trainer, it's good for the other field trainers, it's good for the program, and the program comes to be respected a lot more than it did before. So that the people who were the dead wood or just have lost that zeal for training, they don't make it anymore because of keeping up with those standards. Not only setting personal standards for ourselves turns out to be one of the greatest things we can do, but appreciating how much power and influence we have as a field training officer is crucial for everyone in the organization. Hi, I'm Neil Troutman, and this segment's about unappreciated career administrative dangers. Right up front, let's talk about one that's pervasive, but we don't talk about. Officers across the nation have a phrase for it. The most common phrase is retired on duty. Here's the problem. Many administrators have spent decade after decade pouring their heart into doing a good job, working hard, working far more hours than most people ever know that they work. And in the ending years, 2, 3, 4 years away from retirement, it's easy for an administrator to tell himself or herself, I've worked hard, and the consequence of my work means that I can relax a little bit, that I've got a group of other people, I've surrounded myself with competent people, and they're doing a great job. The fallacy of that, of course, is that many times that's not the case. and that from an administrative standpoint, those that we depend upon, unfortunately, let us down. And it's easy to lose that zeal sometimes for physical reasons. You're in your 50s or so, and it's don't have the energy that we used to have. But more often than not, we just surmise that everything's okay because everything has been okay for the last 20 years or so forth in the organization. The obvious solution is to recommit ourselves. Well, there's techniques for that work well. Some administrators, the only training that they get is at the annual Chiefs Conference or Sheriff's Conference or Federal Law Enforcement Leadership Conference. So it's just annual. Have you ever been to a conference and it just really psychs you up and you feel energized and you feel recommitted? And all those things, you're going to get off your good intentions and actually implement those things and do those things and do that needs assessment and start having more meetings and so forth and better annual goals and objectives and plans. Well, going to seminars, executive development type of seminars is a great way to do that. Other people I know say books, leadership books. They're always reading about the latest and greatest from people who really know how to write and inspire. Another technique is the audio tapes. Regardless of what method is best for you, it is just healthy for all of us to take a second look every now and then and say, are we doing our best? Have we become lax compared with what got us to the position? Is there some part of us that we're just apathetic about and we're not really looking at the organization like we used to? And I think that's healthy for any of us. Another unappreciated danger, commonly referred to as CompStat. CompStat. The phrase is just simply a phrase. It stands for computer statistics, and it was implemented by the New York City Police Department, Bill Bratton, decades ago now. And like some other things, great in concept, great in theory, but then sometimes we mess it all up. And with CompStat, and I'm including this as an unappreciated danger, it's not the theory, it's not the concept. It's how we implement it on a daily basis. More than once, I've been inside a law enforcement agency, and the scandal was either broken about CompStat, even though maybe it's a different phrase that agency put on it, computer statistics. It's a software program, software-driven computer system for tracking, more often than not, crime statistics, and then holding people accountable. And that's the theory of that is exceptional, and I'm all for it. The danger is that if crime statistics are high in a particular area, let's say theft as an example, or burglaries or robberies, whatever the case would be, there's a lot of informal behind-the-scenes pressure that can come down through the chain of command to the lowest level, usually the line supervisors, who are generating the numbers. More often than not, there are regular meetings. In some departments it's every month, other departments it might be every quarter. And where there are misconduct and scandals generated from the CompStat process, it's when people attend these meetings and they're put down, they're ridiculed. In some cases, you're just blatantly shouted at these meetings, and in many cases, the meetings are open to the public. So what happens? When the leadership is led by fear in these open meetings, then behind the scenes, down the span of control, the pressure comes down and lands ultimately on the people generating the numbers. And in some cases, they're told, don't bring me bad numbers. And if people are told, don't bring me bad numbers, and the people generating the crime statistics are in an awful situation. So the consequence? Cooking the books, falsifying the numbers, a particularly devastating betrayal of the public, because we're portraying ourselves to be doing a better job with crime and crime prevention than we really are. So when the scandal breaks, we've lost the trust of the community. But before the scandal breaks, we've lost the trust of the employees. Because it's not like this is a secret among the troops. Because the people who have to falsify the records, they know that that's a career-ending act if they're caught. And they're worried about it. But they've been ordered, don't bring me bad numbers. So they talk among their friends. We're not going to keep that quiet. So the first devastating thing that happens is non-supervisors, non-leaders lose so much respect for the leadership of the organization. In some cases, people haven't been able to live with themselves, so they exposed it. And then, of course, you lose the ultimate the ultimate trust of the community, which may take years and years and years to rebuild. Another unappreciated danger is being blindsided. In one case, a case study where I went, it was a case about falsifying records, and it was widespread throughout the organization. And after the scandal broke and made the headlines, personnel went to jail for this. I was asked to come back and talk to administrators. And it's a large organization, so I had a couple of dozen administrators every day. So I had 5 days, one-day classes, every day a different couple of dozen administrators. And my point in going over this case study is, at the end of the day, and I didn't not talk about what had happened in this organization because it was an exceptional organization until this happened. This was totally contrary to everything else about the organization that I had learned over the years, and I'd been going there more than a decade. Towards the end of the day, I asked these administrators if at any point in their career, if they had ever told down their chain of command and then mandated that every leader level down their chain of command do the same so that you had their whole span of control, and then confirm that this had happened, if they'd ever said, make sure that everybody hears, don't hide problems. If anybody down the chain of command thinks that there could be misconduct, and even if it's subjective, they're not sure if it's significant or not, err on the side of letting me know about it and then bring it up the chain of command. Let me decide whether or not it's significant and we need to do anything. Don't let me be blindsided. Because sometimes people just don't want to bring bad news up the chain of command. But more often than not, administratively, we've never said down the chain of command, make sure that no one hides problems, make sure that no one ever covers up anything. America is a pretty forgiving nation. There are endless examples of that. But what no one forgives is lying to the public, lying to citizens, lying to cover up our misdeeds. Nobody forgives that. And in the span of an administrative career, most people retire and have never built back that trust. Another unappreciated danger area, evidence rooms, evidence lockers, property rooms. If you study this area, it's not the accidental paperwork screw up I'm talking about. I'm talking about intentional theft from the evidence room. Many times it's about drugs, but it obviously can be anything of value. Ask yourself as a solution, when's the last time your evidence property room was audited? Then ask yourself, have you ever looked at the audit? Have you ever questioned the legitimacy, the validity of the audit? What kind of safeguards do you have? When you study cases of evidence room scandals, you find many times the safeguards that we think we have, we don't have. And the people who have direct access to the evidence room are the people with the drug problem or the financial problem, and that's why things are being stolen from the evidence room. The safeguards we think we have are the perpetrators who are stealing from it. It's an area that many times we just don't think about, that we need to. The next area, overtime abuse. The granddaddy of all studies about serious misconduct in law enforcement was a study done by the National Institute of Ethics. And it was a study nationwide. Every state in the nation participated. It was a study of officers nationwide who had been decertified. In lay terms, you could say, confirmed to have committed serious felony violations, many of which they went to prison. 19.9% of those who were totally decertified had their credentials taken from them in law enforcement. It was city, county, and state types of law enforcement. 19.9% were decertified for falsifying, and falsifying records, and the vast majority was overtime. It's another area that we just don't appreciate the danger of misconduct, and I think the reason for that, the most common reason, is that we think we have safeguards. We think the safeguards is overtime has to be approved by a supervisor. Well, sometimes the perpetrator is the supervisor. So the safeguards that we think we have, we don't have. Next unappreciated area for administrators, bad morale. Everybody talks about it. Seldom do we ever do anything about it. The solution for bad morale, well, first of all, the danger in it is because that's what more often than not people use to rationalize their misconduct. They think they're the victim of some type of unfairness. A study done, again, by the National Institute of Ethics nationwide found that the greatest source of bad morale in law enforcement is favoritism. Favoritism in two different ways. Favoritism about discipline and favoritism over promotions. Favoritism, in other words, is the single greatest source of bad morale in law enforcement, according to that study. Most departments don't do anything about that. And many leaders rationalize that everybody has a morale problem. It's just something you're going to have. And we can be better than that. Why not consider doing a needs assessment of, do you have employees who are angry and frustrated? And if so, and most do, what is it about? Because you can do a confidential survey and do it in such a way that people can be honest and tell the truth. Then you'll find the causes for your morale. You'll find out exactly how much bad morale there is, how much anger and frustration that there is. And now when we find our causes, now we can address it. And in your particular organization,